are happen across the table with a diversity of the leaders of the private sector.
Now, I introduced the program and I justified my inviting you here with a little bit of encouragement, I think, by saying you've made a number of statements on the no confidence motion. I wonder if we can turn our attention to those statements and without quoting from them, but just
Well,
the essence.
I mean, they fundamentally called upon the political parties to respect the Constitution and to respect the law. That is fundamentally what these statements have said. And to respect the way the law is applied. That's fundamentally what they say.
Now you made more than one statement. You made a statement. You made
Now-
statement
now-
before.
Having said that, the fact that the no confidence motion has become a controversial matter, the fact that it has become enmeshed in constitutional requirements makes it even more important that independent bodies like ourselves address it responsibly. And that's what we try to do. Some persons think that we are biased in favor of one political party or another. That comes with the territory as far as I'm concerned. When there is a political controversy, any independent commentary on it is going to be labeled by those who like what you say as being favorable to the correct side, and when they don't like what you say, it's biased in favor of the other side. But when we come to this whole issue of the no confidence motion, it really is, in my view, fairly straightforward.
No, but I was trying to
But-
get the sequence correct. You had, is it two statements?
Three.
Three
We've had
statements.
three.
Three statements.
Three
And they were punctuated at some point by the court decision. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, the first one happened the day after the no confidence motion. I, as the chairman of the Governance and Security, was tasked by the chairman of the Private Sector Commission, Desmond Sears, to observe the vote in Parliament. And I did, and I reported back to him what I saw, and I reported back to him the response by the government, by the Prime Minister, and the graciousness and the high sense of responsibility that I was actually, I mean, obviously people were very sad that it happened the way it did because nobody really expected it. But I reported back to the chairman that I saw a high level of maturity in the Parliament that night, being displayed by the Prime Minister, who accepted the vote,
And by the
and
public.
by the leader of the opposition. So I reported that, and the next day the Private Sector Commission basically issued a statement.
Well, we issued a
Talking about
statement
this.
because it became, at that point in time, a matter of controversy.
The day
Not
after?
yet, not yet. Okay, all we did the next day, because it wasn't until I think after the president left the country on Christmas Day that it started to change. But on the 21st and the 22nd,
You've
we
got to
issued one,
remember
yes.
that the cameras were on the event.
Okay, I see what you mean.
The event itself manifested huge controversy.
Yes.
I see what you mean.
So
yes.
it became a controversy from that point in time. I don't mean it became a dispute between the political parties,
Right.
but it became a
Became
controversy
controversial.
of national concern
Yes.
from the moment it happened. Because it happened live. It happened in the view of the entire nation. The cameras were focused on it. Some very unpleasant things occurred at the time. So,
But still, what Jerry's saying, that's not gainsay what Jerry said.
No.
That the Prime Minister, in fact, made a very gracious
Yes.
and, as you said,
Not
mature
once,
statement.
twice. Not once, twice, because
well,
he
I
said it
don't
in
know.
the chamber,
I
then
wouldn't
after.
use the term gracious. I think what the Prime Minister did was he did his job. He respected the fact that the Speaker of the House had ruled it as valid.
Right.
Mhm.
He was aware that the whole nation was paying attention. He was aware that there were significant crowds outside of the National Assembly with some significant biases on either side. And he quite responsibly and properly declared the government's recognition of the Speaker's ruling. That was what a Prime Minister, given the absence of the President of the country, had to do and had to do immediately. That responsibility, in my view, fell upon the government.
Yes.
It is the fact that all of that has changed has made matters significantly much worse.
So in terms of the sequence of the statements and the events,
The first
You would like
statement
to take that up?
basically, the
Yes.
first statement basically
respect.
outlined. Yes, yes.
yes.
Respect for the Speaker's ruling.
Yes.
And the first statement I think dealt with the fact that that we observed it. We thought it was done properly. We respect the Speaker's ruling, and we expected the constitutional triggers that was pulled that night for the provisions that it would have been respected. And that is basically what our statement
When you
said.
say constitutional triggers, could you
Well,
explain that?
when the no confidence motion was passed, Article 106.6 and 106.7 was triggered immediately.
Of the
106.6,
Constitution.
yes, and 106.6 said they call on the issue of the resignation of the ministers from cabinet and the president from cabinet. But the president remains the president, and the ministers remain the president, the ministers, as outlined in Article
But
106.7.
much more important than that, I'm sure you were going on to say it anyway, it required that an election be held in 90 days.
And that was the constitutional provisions, and so we
Yes.
respected that, and everybody in Parliament seemed to have respected that, and even the next day, I think the president came out and respected that, and then I saw an entire cadre of ministers deployed on Christmas Eve day across Georgetown, implying exactly the same thing, that this thing happened and that the government was now going to go to the people to reaffirm their confidence, and they were going to use their record of all the things they've done, the tongues, the roads, the bridges, and the things that they've done.
Well, they were preparing in recognition of the fact that there was an election due to be held until such time as they reversed their position.
Yes.
Correct. So that was our statement, basically, the
and
first
then,
one.
and okay, go on.
Look at you.
When did you issue your next statement? Then we heard talk about going to court.
Well, we issued the next statement when the government reversed its position. And again, its focus was recognize the Constitution, respect it, and don't depart from it. But by then, many things had begun to happen. And the most important of them all is the government pronouncing that it no longer recognized the validity of the no confidence motion.
Can they do that? Can a government do that? Recognize that on which the speaker has pronounced?
But what is important?
Well, I don't know whether it can, it did.
but,
Yes.
but
No,
what,
man, can it properly do
but
so?
what is important
You
is
have
that
to tell me again, I will tell you, you're the lawyer.
is that the speaker said on January 3rd they will meet again
Yes.
and they will discuss the consequence
Yes.
of the vote.
Good. Yes.
And then during that period, the speaker was then written to many times by many people asking him to review his decision.
Well,
And
I
at
think
the end of that decision is when our second statement came, because
the speaker was put on the spot by the government.
Mhm.
He was written to officially by the government, and he was asked to reconsider and reverse it.
And the speaker is himself a lawyer.
A PhD in
he
law.
has a PhD in
Indeed, and a highly respected
yes.
lawyer. The speaker then went public.
Who is also, just for the record, who is also a nominee for the speakership of the government.
Oh yes, I mean the speaker is appointed by the government.
Government, that's correct.
So you could say he was the government man. I don't think that this particular speaker we have is anybody's man.
That's correct. That's correct.
But many speakers, I have to tell you, have been.
Yes.
I won't name them. But we've had a history of speakers who've not been that politically independent in their ruling.
Now, Kit, and you've been a major observer, slightly older than some of us here.
A lot older than
There is no speaker who has had to make as fundamental a decision on the existence of a government as Dr. Barton on that evening.
No, because it's never happened.
Yes, exactly.
It has never happened. I mean, this is the first motion of no confidence
Yes.
that has ever been filed in our history.
Well,
Well,
no,
it's been
one was filed
actually
before.
been-
the first one
no.
that was taken to the floor of the National Assembly.
Remember,
Not
they had-
voted on.
Right.
That's what I mean. Yes, yes.
I shouldn't have said filed, not
Yeah.
voted on.
Voted on. That's
But what I will say to you again, on January 3rd, I was actually, again, dispatched to observe the speaker's ruling. And the speaker was eloquent, and he was, I just sat there and I listened to him deliver his ruling. And I think he did it so well. And at the end of it, we figured that this was a done deal. That, if it had to change, that the speaker would have changed it, and he didn't. And then the private sector issued a second statement then after
Yes, urging that the speaker's ruling
Right.
now is respected.
Did the private sector get
Well-
concerned at that stage when there still appeared to be challenges coming?
Yes, I think we began to be concerned because the reversal of the government's position and the government's declaration of its disbelief in the validity of
Which constituted a rejection of the ruling and affirmation by the speaker.
Correct.
Right. So you didn't have to be that clever to see that this was leading to possibilities of instability right away.
Yeah.
I mean, the business community never likes anything that is horrifically unstable. You can't do business in an unstable and country.
And it actually comes down to jobs. It actually comes down to the sustenance of people jobs. But what is important, I believe, is that on the speaker's ruling, at no point in time, I believe any one of us, whether as individual citizens or as private sector leaders, would ever deny the right of any citizen, including the government, of the right to appeal, the right to higher courts. But because the Speaker of the National Assembly ruled once, he was given a time and then he ruled again. It was kind of unbelievable to us that we were not believing the Speaker.
And then it went to the court.
Correct.
Well, the speaker, in much of what he said, invited the court to pronounce on the validity of his ruling,
Which he
or-
need not have said, because that's a given.
But he did that in the context of the future.
Correct.
Yes, he said
You know,
yes.
he didn't ask the court to say, "Am I correct?"
Yes.
He said, quite properly, I think, that it is such a major issue, and since it clearly had become one of controversy, it would be a good thing if the court ruled on how it be addressed going forward.
Yes. And how did you think the court, and when we say the court, we really mean a single judge of the court, the Honorable Chief Justice?
She is the High Court.
Yes.
The matter now was appealed by the governing party.
No, but what did she say? That's what we're trying to get to. What was the effect of her ruling?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I considerably admire the fact that she ruled so comprehensively and so quickly. She need not have done that. She delivered a ruling which must have caused her many sleepless nights.
Yes.
She did it in an extraordinarily fast time.
Mhm.
Uh, but more important than that, she didn't treat it with anything but absolute care and concern. It was not an off-the-cuff ruling,
No. No.
which many Chief Justices have been known to make. She covered, and I say this as a layperson, every aspect of the law that she could possibly dream up and refer and research.
She did.
Um, and she was not dealing with one case, she was dealing with three. I
That's
think.
correct.
3 cases,
That's correct.
all at once,
Yes.
you having brought one yourself.
Yes.
And she did it with remarkable aplomb, and she did it with remarkable dignity. And whether she was right or wrong, the nation owes her a huge debt.
Did she strike you as being right?
For me,
Yes.
absolutely. She did not only rule, but she gave justification. When she dealt with the issue of the 33 and 34, her ruling, she didn't only deal with it in law, she dealt with it in mathematics. And mathematics is science. Mathematics is not guesswork. I'm a science person, and every mathematician you speak to, I mean, it is the smallest child will answer that question for you, but the judge went into great detail in explaining her decision and justification.
I will answer you different. I would not say that she was right. I would say that she gave a ruling that I expected her to give.
Hmm.
Whether
Because it seemed logical from the language of the
there
Constitution.
was nothing in any of the protests and the challenges that I have personally seen, and I don't speak in the context of the private sector, that convinces me that the no confidence motion was not valid.
Mhm.
But that's just my personal position.
Yeah, yeah.
So we get to this situation. So she reaffirmed the speaker's his ruling and his affirmation. We get to this position now. There's a right to appeal, of course there is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But there's something also called an abuse of the process. But now the critical thing about the decision. Does the decision stand? And you were talking, Kit, about elections in 90 days and the resignation of the cabinet.
I want to say this. I was going to say earlier on that it's a fairly simple matter, and you asked me to set that aside for the moment. Why I say it's simple is this. You have an opposition that is out of power, and its legitimate priority is to regain power.
Mhm.
And that is their objective. You have a government or a party in government that's in power, and their legitimate priority, always both sides within the law,
Mm-hmm.
to try and stay in power.
Yes.
And that, in fact, is what's happening, and that is part of the problem. Because if either side seeks to pursue its objectives outside of the law, then the country is in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. That's correct.
And there is some things that I think in this discussion that I'd like to clarify. And I think need to be clarified. One is that the ruling of the Chief Justice, regardless of its correctness or otherwise, is the law at this time,
Currently, correct.
and remains so. And it remains so particularly because the government's lawyer sought to have a stay of the execution of that ruling, and it was rejected. It is wrong for any government spokesman, in my view, to try and convey a public position that nothing has changed, that it's business as usual, that the government remains in power regardless of the ruling, without some consequences of the condition of that government.
It no longer has a cabinet.
Coming to that,
Sure, sorry.
part of the ruling, we know, consistent with the Constitution, is the cabinet says so in black and white, is to resign. It doesn't mean that the whole of the cabinet have to rush in there and say, and put resignation letters in front of the president. It means that in fact there is no longer a cabinet in place.
Lawyers call it by operation of the law.
Right. It also means that the president, who is the head of the cabinet, no longer has a cabinet to be head of.
That's correct, yes.
So he's not head of the
And
cabinet.
that explains why he is mentioned in terms of the cabinet, including the president.
Right. So I think it is dangerous and it is wrong for any government spokesman to convey otherwise to the public. Now that could all change. Yes. They've said, we're appealing. But the fact of the appeal, until it is heard and ruled on, has changed nothing. And that is why the private sector went out of its way to make a statement trying to emphasize that fact. Much has changed. The government remains in office. The president remains in office. They both have a job to do. But there are certain restrictions upon that existence. The bigger problem, which I'm sure you're going to address, is the fact that there's a clock that's been started. It's a clock
From the 21st of December.
which says in 90 days elections have to be held. The conducting of those elections is dependent upon GECOM, the Guyana Elections Commission, to be prepared and ready.
But the obligation, as 1067 says, the government shall hold elections.
Yes, indeed. So, unless something were to happen that says it doesn't have to hold elections in 90 days, the law requires it to do just that.
And Jerry, I was just doing some numbers. Of that 90 days Kit is talking about, which is restating the Constitution, 47 days have already passed. That's more than
Well,
half.
that's why I brought up the issue of GECOM. And we addressed GECOM
On both times of our
in
statements.
both of our statements. We said that we expected GECOM to be prepared to hold elections as is required, correct me if I'm wrong, by the Constitution.
Yeah. Constitution is the supreme law. GECOM is itself a creation of the Constitution.
Yes.
As is the government.
I was going to say a creature of the Constitution.
That has a certain connotation.
Well, so there are two things, and Kit made the point. The government right to appeal is unquestionable. The government have the right to appeal. But while that appeal is
Pending.
the constitutional provisions that was triggered continues. And there's only one way at this time, until a court might rule differently, that could delay that, and that is the parliament with a 2/3 majority agreeing to delay the 90 days.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's the other aspect that we haven't talked about.
Yes, yeah.
That the only way that 90 days under the Constitution can be extended is if there's a 2/3 majority decision. in
Which
the
requires the
Parliament
opposition to
extended, which obviously requires cooperation between the government and the opposition. If the opposition decides in its own wisdom or lack of it that they're not going to render a 2/3 majority, then it won't happen.
Now,
Then the consequence of that,
The consequences
it's
of
frightening.
that, well, it's very dangerous for the country because you would then have a constitutional requirement that an election be held for a government which has been challenged. And if that election is not held, then the legality of the government comes into question.
Yes. That's frightening because the Constitution doesn't contemplate an unconstitutional or an illegal government.
No, it only contemplates a legal one.
That's correct.
so for the opposition, GCOM will need to convince the opposition if the delay is as a result of GCOM administration being delinquent in their preparation to be always ready because because of our constitution, GCOM should always be ready to conduct the election.
We are meeting tomorrow
Yes.
with the GCOM chairman and his officials. It is the way the private sector commission works. We've also sought meetings with all of the political parties concerned, and indeed we sought a meeting with the president himself.
Correct.
Because we wish...
What's the response to those requests?
Well, let's take them one by one.
Yes, go on.
First of all, as I said, GCOM
GCOM.
has responded positively, and we're meeting with the chairman. And we will ask him to tell us in very simple terms, I think, are you ready to hold the election?
And if not, why?
And if not, why?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, when? I mean, those are the three questions we're going to ask.
Yes.
And find out what the facts are. But there is sufficient reason for public concern in that GCOM, first of all, has remained very silent on the matter. Secondly, the chairman himself has been ill and therefore not operational. Thirdly,
But there's nothing
The
that says
commissioner-
that without the chairman, GCOM...
no, but still, he is
is
the
crippled.
chairman. He is the chairman. And it would be better that he wasn't ill, and it would be better that he was in place. The fact is, he is ill or was ill and wasn't in place.
The point I was
And
making,
then-
that
then I have a
he
third-
doesn't have to be there in order
No.
for the
Yes, I
decision
hear
to be
you.
I
made.
understand that, but it'd be better if he was.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
The third point I want to make is that the Elections Commissioner has announced that GCOM cannot be ready to hold an election until July.
Is it the Elections Commission or the Chief Elections Officer?
Chief Elections
Chief
Officer.
Elections Officer,
Mhm.
Sorry,
Chief
yes.
Elections Officer has said that. He's gone public and said that. That has specifically dangerous consequences because the election list is said to be expire at the end of April. Whether that
But we had elections in November.
Yeah.
Well, you can logically suggest and argue that there should be no reason why they're not prepared, but I'm not going to get into that.
But Kit, I want to ask you this.
We want to know,
Mhm.
Yes.
we want to know, and we should hear truthfully, promptly, and honestly from the Elections Commission what the situation is.
This question is not intended to be prejudicial to that meeting you have. But as of today, GCOM has had 84 days notice of the no confidence motion
To make themselves
From-
ready.
to make itself ready. And in fact, GCOM must know the Constitution. It's a creature of the Constitution. It must know that it can be called upon under Article 106.7 to hold elections in 90 days' time.
Yeah.
Well,
To what extent does that bear on you?
From the day the Chief Justice ruled the legitimacy of the no confidence motion, the validity of it, from that day, the 90 days clock started.
Yes. But I was saying,
you said you're talking
no,
about the
not
Speaker
from
of
the
National
review.
Assembly.
No, it's not from the Chief Justice's ruling.
From the
It's
Speaker
from
of
the
the
date
National
Assembly.
of